Today's lesson is Chapter 6, Lesson 2, Comparing and Ordering Fractions, Decimals, and Percents. Our essential question today is, how can you order numbers that are written as fractions, decimals, and percents? So here's the key point. When comparing and ordering fractions, decimals, and percents, write all of the numbers as all fractions, or all decimals, or all percents. But here's what I want you to do. I want you to rewrite everything as decimals, because that's going to make this simpler for you. So let's just start off with example number 1. Comparing fractions, decimals, and percents, part A. Which is greater, 3/20ths or 16%? So what I want to do is I want to take both of these numbers and make sure that I turn them into decimals, because decimals are easy to compare which one's bigger and which one's smaller. So if I turn 3/20ths into a decimal, I can use a calculator and divide it, or I can do long division. 3 divided by 20 is equal to 0.15. If you're unsure how to change a fraction into a decimal, please go back and rewatch the video on changing fractions and decimals and percents into other forms. 16% I can change into a decimal by dropping the percent, adding a decimal point, and moving it 2 places to the left. And when I do that, I get 0.16. So now that I'm looking at these decimals, since both of them end, the 5 and the 6 both end in the hundredths place value, it's easy to compare them. I have 15/100ths and I have 16/100ths. 16/100ths is bigger than 15/100ths, so this is the bigger number. But in my answer, I must always use these numbers in my answer. I can't use the decimals that I just found unless we started with a decimal. But if I started with fractions or percents, my answer has to have fractions or percents in the answer. So since 0.16 started as 16%, I can say that 16% is greater than 3/20ths, because 3/20ths was 0.15, but I have to use what the problem started with. All right. Part B, which is greater, 79% or 0.08? Well, 79% and 0.08. So I'm going to change them. I'm going to get rid of the percent sign, add a decimal point, move it 2 places to the left, and I end up with 79% is equal to 0.79. 0.08 is already a decimal. Now what I need to do is I need to make sure that the amount of numbers I have to the right of each decimal point is even or equal. All right, so 0.79 has 2 numbers. The 7 and the 9 are to the right of the decimal point. 0.08 has 2 numbers, the 0 and the 8 to the right of the decimal point. As long as they have the same amount of numbers to the right of the decimal point, I can just compare them by looking at the numbers and saying, okay, this is 79/100ths, and this is 8/100ths. 79/100ths is bigger than 8/100ths. So this is bigger. But I have to write it like it was in the original problem. So 79% is greater than 0.08, because that's how the problem started. All right, there's 2 problems there for you to do on your own. Go ahead and pause the video, do these 2 problems, and then restart the video to check your answers. Okay, number 1, which is greater, 25% or 7/25ths? So I will write both of those numbers down. And I recommend that you do the same. Please write down all this work as you're doing your work. The more that you write down, the less of a chance you have to make mistakes. 25%, drop the percent, add a decimal, move it 2 places to the left. 0.25 is what 25% is equal to. 7/25ths, if I do long division or use a calculator, I'm going to get 0.28. Sorry, this is a 0.28. So I look at these and I say, okay, I have the same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point. That means I'm allowed to compare them the way they are. So when I do that, whoops, sorry about that. Let me extend this down a little bit. So when I do that, I can see that this is 28/100ths and this is 25/100ths. 28/100ths is bigger than 25/100ths. But 28/100ths started out as 7/25ths. So I have to write 7/25ths is greater than 0.25 started as 25%, so 7/25 is greater than 25%. Number 2, which is greater, 0.49 or 94%. So I'll start by writing them down. 0.49 is already a decimal, so I will write it as 0.49. 94% can be changed. I will get rid of the percent, add a decimal, move it 2 places to the left, and I end up with 0.94. Again, I look to see, do they have the same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point? Yes, they do. So all I'm doing is comparing the numbers to the right of the decimal point. 94 is bigger than 49. So I can say that this 0.94 is bigger than 0.49. And 0.94 started as 94%. So 94% is greater than 0.49 started as 0.49. All right, if you have any questions on this, please make sure to ask when you come back to class. All right, oh, that went too far, so let's go here. All right, a real life application of this skill. You, your sister, and a friend each take the same number of shots at a soccer goal. You make 72% of your shots, your sister makes 19/25 of her shots, and your friend makes 0.67 of his shots. Who made the fewest shots? That means the least amount of shots. So we have to compare these 3 numbers, and we're going to do that by changing them all into decimals. So you had 72%, your sister had 19/25, and your friend had 0.67. So I'm going to change them all to decimals. 72%, we're going to change to 0.72. 19/25, again, you can use your calculator, or you can do long division to get 0.76. And 0.67 is already in decimal form. So the first thing I want to do here is check to make sure that I have the same amount of numbers to the right of the decimal point. I have 2 numbers here in the 0.72. There are 2 numbers to the right of the decimal in 0.76, and there are 2 numbers to the right of the decimal in 0.67. So I can compare them. So all I'm doing is comparing the numbers, 72, 76, and 67. So I'm looking for the fewest. So 0.67, because 67 is less than 72 or 76. So this is the smallest number. And who was that? Oh, am I looking for the smallest? I'm sorry. Yes, the smallest. So who had the smallest? Well, your friend made 0.67. So your friend is the answer. For a moment there, I got confused. I thought I was looking for the biggest for a moment there, but it was the fewest. I was right. So 0.67 is the smallest number, so your friend made the fewest shots. Okay, here's another on your own problem. So go ahead, pause the video, take care of this problem, restart the video to check your solution. All right, so you make 75% of your shots. Your sister makes 13 out of 20 of her shots, and your friend makes 0.7 of his shots. Who made, this time we want the most shots. Okay, so we're going to change them all into decimals again. 75% is equal to 0.75. 13 over 20, if we do long division or calculator, gives us 0.65. And 0.7 is already a decimal. But when I go to compare these numbers, I've been saying you always got to check and make sure you have the same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point. This one has 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point. This one has 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point. This one only has 1 number to the right of the decimal point. So we've got to change that. We got to make sure everything has 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point. So in order to do that, I just need to add a 0 at the end of this as a placeholder, so that we're comparing numbers with the same number of decimal places. All right, so now that I've done that, I can just look at the numbers and see which one of those numbers is bigger. Is it 75, 65, or 70? They all start with 0, so I'm just looking at the numbers to the right of the decimal point. 75 is the biggest, so this is the biggest. That's the most. Oops, ST. So who did 75%? That was you. So you made the most shots. All right, so that's what we would put for the answer. You made the most. All right, if you have any questions on that, make sure you ask when you return to class. All right, another real-life application of this skill. All right, the map shows the portions of the U.S. population that live in 5 states. List the 5 states in order by population from least to greatest. That means from smallest to largest. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of organize my work here. I have 5 states, so I'm going to use an abbreviation to list the 5 states. I have Washington, I have Michigan, I have New York, Ohio, and California. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down the number that represents each one of these states. So Washington was 1/50th. Michigan was 0.03. New York is 6%. That's a 6%. Ohio is 1/25th. And California was 0.12. All right. So in order to compare these, I have to change them all into decimals. So if I convert 1/50th into a decimal, I get 0.02. Calculator or long division. Michigan's already a decimal, so I'll leave that the way it is. New York, changing a percent into a decimal gives me 0.06. Ohio, 1/25th. If I change that into a decimal, I get 0.04. And California is already a decimal, that's 0.12. So in order to compare these, I have to make sure they all have the same number of decimal places, same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point. So they all have 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point, so I don't need to change anything. So I'm good. So all I have to do is look at the numbers to the right of the decimal point and see which is the smallest and which is the biggest. So I'm comparing 2, 3, 6, 4, and 12. Those are the numbers I'm comparing. 2 is the smallest, so Washington has the smallest population. That one's done. Michigan is the next smallest with 0.03, so Michigan would be next. The next smallest would be 0.04, which is Ohio. Next smallest would be 0.06, which is New York. And then the largest would be California with 0.12. So California. Now I abbreviated, but this would be my answer because they asked to order the states, all right, in order from least to greatest. They didn't ask for the numbers, they asked for the states. So I went ahead and did that. All right, there's an on your own problem here. Oops, I got some work from a previous, so let's get rid of that. So the portion of the U.S. population that lives in Texas is 2/25. The portion that lives in Illinois is 0.042. Reorder the states in example 3, including Texas and Illinois. I'm going to highlight this for you right here because that has three numbers to the right of the decimal point. All of our previous information up here only had 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point. So you're going to have to make some changes to those numbers so that everything has 3 numbers to the right of the decimal point. Just giving you a little hint here before you do the problem. So go ahead and pause the video, do the problem, come back and check your solution, and go ahead and do that. Okay, let's get rid of that. So hopefully you've taken care of that. So the first thing that I need to do is I got to figure out what is 2/25, which represents Texas. What is that going to be as a decimal? So Texas is 2/25. So I got to change that into a decimal, and when I do that, either by long division or calculator, I get 0.08. Illinois is already 0.042. Now, if I go back up to the top, I can bring down what the other states are. So Washington, Michigan, New York, Ohio, and California. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to place them in some kind of order like they were before. So I know that Washington was the smallest with 0.02. Michigan was next with 0.03. Ohio was next with 0.04. Then I think we had New York was 0.06, and we had California was 0.12. Now remember I said, I gave you that hint. Illinois has 3 numbers to the right of the decimal point. So that means we got to add some zeros here to change all these other numbers that have 2 numbers to the right of the decimal point into numbers that have 3 numbers to the right of the decimal point, because we can't really compare them unless they all have the same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point. So I'll start up here with the 0.08. I'm just going to add a 0 to that. And all these numbers down here I'm going to add zeros to. I'm doing it in a different color so that you can really see what I'm doing. Okay? And now when we go to compare these numbers, I look at these and I'm saying, okay, this number, when I look at it, I don't need to worry about the decimal point and any zeros that come before the number. I'm just looking at the 2 numbers, 8 and the 0. This represents 80. Illinois has 42, and this is out of 1,000, but Illinois has 42. Washington has 20, Michigan 30, Ohio 40, New York 60, and California 120. So those are the numbers I'm looking at when I go to put this in order. All right? So I'm looking for the smallest of these numbers. Well, that's still Washington with 21 thousandths. So Washington is the smallest population. Michigan still has 31 thousandths. That's smaller than anything else that I see. So Michigan would be next. Ohio has 41 thousandths. Illinois up here has 42 one thousandths. So 41 thousandths is still smaller. So Ohio would be next. But then Illinois would be squeezed in there because it has 42 one thousandths, which is less than New York, which has 60 one thousandths. So New York would be next. Texas up here has 81 thousandths. That's bigger than 61 thousandths, but it's smaller than California's 121 thousandths. So the next one would be Texas, and then lastly would be California. Okay? So that's how we would have done that problem. We have to make sure, it's really important that you make all of the numbers look the same. They all have to have the same number of numbers to the right of the decimal point in order to be able to compare them accurately. All right, if you have any questions on that, please make sure you ask those questions when you get back to class. All right, lastly, we have your practice problems for you to look at. For some reason, some of the practice problems became erased. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to re-highlight some of these. So you have 4 and 10, but you're supposed to also have 16 and 19, 21, and 23. For some reason, some of those got erased, so please make sure you take care of those problems. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 problems. Make sure you do these with the work. Turn those into your teacher, because that's the way we're going to be able to know whether or not you understood the lesson. And if there's any problems that you have here, if there's something that you can't figure out, then please make sure you ask one of your teachers when you get back to school.